I look at my trembling, scarred hands. I never thought my mission in the jungle would end this way. It's a story few will believe, but I need to tell it. It all began a few months ago. Our platoon received orders to infiltrate a dense region of the Amazon jungle. We had heard rumors of suspicious activities, disappearances, strange lights at night, and whispers of a cult no one could confirm. Our team consisted of veterans hardened by years of service. I had seen my share of horrors in combat, but what we found there was different. We were deployed by helicopter at dusk. The heat and humidity enveloped us immediately, and the sounds of the jungle surrounded us, creating an unsettling symphony. Sergeant Diaz, our leader, gave us the instructions. "We need to move quickly and silently. Stay alert and don't stray from the group," he said, his voice firm, but his eyes showed an unease he rarely displayed. We began to advance, making our way through the thick vegetation. Sweat dripped down our foreheads, and the oppressive atmosphere started to play with our minds. After several hours of marching, we found the first signs that we were not alone. "Look at this," said Hernandez, pointing to a tree marked with strange dark symbols carved with precision that didn't seem human. They were symbols none of us had seen before. We looked at each other, a feeling of unease growing within the group. However, we continued, trusting that our training would get us out of any situation. The first night was unsettling. We set up camp in a clearing and established rotating watches. But in the middle of the night, we were awakened by muffled screams and the sound of a struggle. We got up quickly, weapons ready, but it was already too late. Ramirez had disappeared, and we only found his rifle and a trail of blood leading deeper into the jungle. "What the hell happened here?" exclaimed Diaz, his face pale. No one had an answer. We decided to follow the blood trail at dawn, hoping to find Ramirez alive. The tension was palpable as we advanced. The trail led us to a dark, deep cave, its entrance hidden by vegetation. We entered cautiously, lighting the way with our flashlights. What we found inside chilled our blood. The cave opened into a wide chamber filled with symbols and rudimentary altars. In the center, a circle of candles surrounded Ramirez, tied up and gagged, his eyes filled with terror. We were not alone. Hooded figures dressed in dark robes surrounded us, their whispers filling the air. "Fire!" shouted Diaz, and we unleashed a barrage of bullets. Chaos took over the place. The figures moved with unnatural speed, and although we managed to take down several, the rest vanished into the cave's darkness. We freed Ramirez, who could barely speak of the experience. "They're not human. They're trying to summon something ancient," he managed to say between sobs. That night was even worse. We decided to stay in the cave, the only defense we could improvise. We set double guards, but one by one our men began to disappear. First it was Lopez, then Garcia. Each time someone disappeared, we found more symbols carved into the walls, as if the cave was alive and feeding on our fear. The dark rituals continued. We could hear the chanting in the distance, a hypnotic melody that infiltrated our dreams. We began to see things, shadows moving among the trees, glowing eyes in the dark. Diaz tried to keep us together, but the fear and despair were too strong. The last night before everything fell apart, we were ambushed. We were surrounded by dozens of those hooded figures. Our ammunition was running out, and hand-to-hand combat was inevitable. "We can't keep this up," shouted Hernandez, fighting off two of them. "We have to get out of here." Amidst the chaos, I saw Diaz fall, surrounded by those beings. His screams echoed in the cave, a sound I will never forget. Hernandez and I managed to escape through a narrow tunnel we found in the back wall. We ran without stopping, guided only by desperation. Finally, we reached a clearing, wounded and exhausted. The dawn light began to filter through the trees. We collapsed, aware that we were not safe, but without the strength to continue. Hernandez died that morning. His wounds were too severe. I buried him with the few forces I had left and continued alone, wandering through the jungle aimlessly with the constant feeling of being watched. Days later, I was rescued by a search patrol. I could barely speak, barely move. I was taken back to the base, where I told my story. No one wanted to believe me, but the marks on my body and mind were proof enough. Now here I am, trying to piece my life back together. I don't know if I will ever be able to forget what I saw in that jungle. But I know one thing. That cult is still out there, and their hunger for sacrifices will never be sated. It wasn't the first time I had seen death, but that night in the jungle changed everything I believed about reality. I look back with the clarity of hindsight, knowing I can never erase from my mind the lights that led us to madness. It was the year 2005. My unit had been sent on a reconnaissance mission in a dense jungle somewhere in remote South America. Our objective was to confirm the presence of insurgents and gather information about their movements. There were 6 of us: Lieutenant Ramirez, Sergeant Alvarez, Corporals Morales and Perez, Soldier Garcia, and myself. We had advanced without incident during the first day, but the real nightmare began the second night. The heat was suffocating, and the humidity covered us like a sticky blanket. We had set up an improvised camp, trying to rest before resuming the march at dawn. Garcia was the first to see them. It was around 2 in the morning, and I was on guard duty with him. The jungle was silent, an unnatural silence that set our nerves on edge. Suddenly, Garcia touched my shoulder. "Did you see that?" he whispered, pointing towards the undergrowth. I looked in the direction he indicated, and there among the trees I saw small bluish lights dancing in the air. They seemed to float, moving from side to side as if they had a will of their own. "What the hell is that?" I murmured. "Will-o'-the-wisps," Garcia responded, his voice tense. "My grandmother used to talk about these things. She said they were spirits." At that moment I woke up Ramirez and told him what we had seen. The lieutenant rubbed his eyes, still half asleep, but quickly got up upon seeing the lights for himself. "They could be flares or some kind of enemy signaling," he said, trying to stay rational. "We need to investigate." We set off, advancing cautiously towards the lights. The jungle seemed to close ranks around us. The usual night sounds had extinguished. Only the buzz of insects and the occasional crunch of our boots on the underbrush remained. The lights kept moving, always just out of our reach. We walked for what seemed like hours, always following those mysterious lights. Ramirez tried to establish radio contact, but all we received was static. "This doesn't make any sense," growled Alvarez. "We're going in circles." Perez, who had a good sense of direction, confirmed our worst fears. The compass spun uncontrollably, and we couldn't trust our own tracks. The lights had led us into some kind of trap. "Let's go back to the camp," ordered Ramirez. "We can't keep chasing ghosts." That's when we heard the first scream. It was Morales, who had lagged a bit to cover our rear. We turned and ran towards him, finding him on his knees, eyes wide open. "There! There!" he screamed, pointing frantically. The lights were approaching, but they were no longer just bluish dots. They took humanoid forms, distorted and empty, like figures made of smoke. They seemed to watch us with invisible eyes, their presence oppressive and chilling. "Let's get out of here," shouted Garcia, panic-stricken. We ran without a fixed course, trying to distance ourselves from those entities. The jungle became an impenetrable maze, and the darkness closed in around us. Every step seemed to take us further from any known point of reference. In the midst of our flight, Perez stumbled and fell into a pit of spikes. His cries of pain echoed in the night, and when we tried to help him, we realized the wound was deep and serious. He was losing a lot of blood. "We can't leave him here," I shouted, trying to stay calm. Ramirez and Alvarez improvised a stretcher with branches and our jackets. We moved more slowly now, and the lights kept stalking us, always at an uncomfortable distance. It was as if they fed on our fear, enjoying our suffering. The night seemed endless. With every step, the weight of despair grew stronger. Finally, when the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we found a clearing. We stopped, exhausted, and Ramirez tried to establish radio contact once more. "This is Bravo Team, requesting immediate evacuation," he said, his voice trembling. "We have a wounded man and need urgent medical assistance." To our relief, the radio emitted a clear response. "Received, Bravo Team, sending a helicopter to your position." We collapsed on the ground, too exhausted to celebrate. Perez was unconscious, his breathing weak. We knew time was running out for him. As we waited, the lights disappeared as if they had never existed. The dawn brought a glimmer of hope, but also left questions unanswered. What were those lights? Why did they lead us through the jungle like that? When the helicopter finally arrived, we boarded with a mix of relief and distrust. As we ascended, I looked down, seeing the jungle grow smaller. But the lights, The lights were still there, hidden from sight, waiting for their next victim. After that mission, none of us were the same. Perez survived, but was scarred by the experience. Ramirez was transferred to an administrative post, and Alvarez requested discharge. Garcia and Morales simply disappeared one day, unable to live with the memories. I carry on trying to find answers. The lights in the jungle will never leave me, and on the darkest nights I can still see them dancing in my mind, reminding me that there are things in this world we will never fully understand. A few weeks ago I received an anonymous letter. It simply said, "The lights are returning," and now every night I see them again in my dreams, closer, more insistent. Perhaps one day I will have the courage to return to the jungle to face those will-o'-the-wisps once more. Until then, I live with the constant fear that one day those lights will come for me too. It was supposed to be a routine mission, or so we were told. But what we found in that house in the jungle never left us the same. I remember those days as if they were yesterday, and even now the whispers of what I lived there torment me. It was the year 1998, and I, Sergeant Ramirez, led a small reconnaissance platoon of the Army. We had been sent to a remote region in the Amazon jungle with orders to investigate reports of guerrilla activity. It was nothing out of the ordinary, but there was something in the air, something we couldn't identify. "Ramirez, we have an intelligence report of suspicious movements in the western sector. Prepare to leave at dawn," ordered Captain Mendoza, reviewing the map with seriousness. "Understood, Captain. Any additional details?" I responded, maintaining composure even though a knot was forming in my stomach. There was something in Mendoza's eyes I hadn't seen before. Concern. "Not much more. Just be careful. Something in those reports doesn't add up," said Mendoza before turning away. The next morning, we set off early. My team consisted of hardened veterans, Corporal Torres, Soldier Hernandez, and Soldier Gomez. I trusted each of them with my life. After several hours of marching under the dense foliage, the radio crackled. "Ramirez, this is Control. We detected an unidentified structure in your area. It could be an enemy outpost. Proceed with caution. Over," informed the metallic voice of the operator. "Understood. Control. Proceeding with caution. Out," I responded, signaling my team to prepare. We advanced stealthily until we spotted the house. It was partially hidden by vegetation, an old, deteriorated structure covered in moss and vines. Something about the place felt off. "Ramirez, are you sure we should go in?" asked Torres, his voice barely a whisper. "We have no choice. We need to make sure there's no enemy activity here," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We approached cautiously, weapons ready. The door creaked as we opened it, revealing a dark, dusty interior. As we entered, the air grew heavy, laden with a rancid smell and something else, something I couldn't identify. We explored the ground floor but found nothing out of the ordinary. However, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. "Ramirez, I don't like this. Something is wrong here," said Hernandez, his voice trembling slightly. "I know, Hernandez. Stay calm. Let's finish checking and get out of here," I responded. We climbed the stairs, which creaked under our weight. We reached a hallway with several doors. We decided to split up to cover more ground. "Torres, Hernandez, check the rooms on the right. Gomez and I will take the ones on the left," I ordered. The first door we opened revealed an empty room, but the second— "Oh my God, Ramirez, look at this!" exclaimed Gomez, pointing his flashlight at the wall. The walls were covered in strange, disturbing symbols painted with what looked like blood. In the center of the room was an old, worn chair with stained leather straps. This is a torture chamber," said Gomez, his voice filled with horror. We gathered in the hallway, all visibly disturbed by what we had found. "We need to leave, now," said Torres, looking around nervously. "I agree. There's no reason to stay here," I responded, feeling the weight of the place on me. No. We started descending the stairs when we heard the first scream. It was Hernandez who had fallen behind. We ran back, but what we saw chilled our blood. Hernandez was on the floor, trembling and muttering incoherently. His eyes were wide with an indescribable terror. "Hernandez, what happened?" I asked, trying to shake him. "The shadows. They surrounded me. I couldn't breathe," he babbled before passing out. We carried him outside, but the air was no less dense. We decided to establish a perimeter and wait for reinforcements. Night fell quickly, and with it, the real nightmare began. Torres was the first to notice something strange. "Ramirez, did you see that? In the tree, a shadow," he whispered, pointing with his flashlight. "There's nothing there, Torres." "Relax," I tried to reassure him, though I was on the edge of panic myself. But then I saw it, a dark figure moving between the trees, disappearing as quickly as it appeared. "We're not alone," I said, my voice barely audible. The noises started soon after, unintelligible whispers, inexplicable creaks, and the constant hum of something we couldn't see. Torres, who was on guard duty, approached me with a terrified expression. "Ramirez, the house, the windows. There are faces in the windows," he said, his voice trembling. I lifted my flashlight and pointed it towards the house. There they were, pale, distorted faces watching us from the dark windows. They couldn't be real, but they were. "This is not possible," murmured Gomez, backing away. The night was an endless torment. We tried to stay together, but the visions and noises disoriented us. At dawn, we were exhausted and mentally shattered. "We need to get out of here," I said in a hoarse voice. "This house is not normal." But before we could move, the radio crackled again. "Ramirez, this is Control. We have reports of enemy activity in your area. Reinforcements are on the way. Hold your position," ordered the voice. "We can't stay here," insisted Torres, but we had no choice. Reinforcements arrived at noon, and I had never been so relieved to see another human being. Captain Mendoza led the group. "Ramirez, what the hell happened here?" he asked, looking at the house with distrust. "It's hard to explain, Captain. That house, there's something in it. Something that's not human," I replied, feeling the weight of my own words. Mendoza decided to go in with his team. We, shattered, waited outside. Hours passed, and it was starting to get dark again when they finally came out. Their faces reflected the same anguish we had experienced. "You're right, Ramirez. This house, there's something deeply wrong here. I'll order it to be sealed and marked as a prohibited zone," said Mendoza with gravity. We withdrew, leaving the House of Pain behind, but not its memories. Every member of my team, including myself, was affected for life by what we lived there. No matter how many classified reports I read or how many times I tried to rationalize it, the truth was simple and terrifying. Some places are marked by an evil so deep that it cannot be understood, only survived. And that house in the jungle was undoubtedly one of those places. I remember that mission as if it were yesterday, though the truth is, a decade has passed. It was 2014, and our unit was tasked with a reconnaissance operation in the Guatemalan jungle. The mission seemed simple: map an unexplored area and verify the existence of smuggling routes. But no one prepared us for what we would find in that cursed cave. We started the hike early in the morning. The sun had barely risen, and the humidity was already suffocating. The leader of our unit, Sergeant Ramirez, had warned us that the jungle could be treacherous, but we were all used to such warnings. We were a group of 5: Ramirez, Morales, Santos, Perez, and myself. The first part of the journey was uneventful, though exhausting. We walked for hours, cutting through the dense vegetation with our machetes and maintaining a tight formation. It was Morales who first mentioned the cave. "I've heard stories about this area," he said as we walked. "The locals call it the Eye of the Demon. They say no one who enters comes out alive." "Do you really believe in that stuff?" Santos responded with a nervous laugh. "They're just stories to scare tourists." Morales shrugged. "I'm just saying what I heard, but who knows? There are things in this jungle that can't be explained." We reached the cave at dusk. It was situated at the base of a cliff, its entrance resembling the open mouth of a beast. A palpable darkness emanated from its interior, and an inexplicable chill enveloped us as we approached. Sergeant Ramirez decided we would set up camp outside the cave and enter the next day with daylight. During the night, the usual sounds of the jungle seemed to silence around the cave. There were no insects, no croaking frogs, no whispering wind through the leaves, only an oppressive silence that seemed to absorb the sound. Around midnight, I was awakened by a scream. It was Perez. He had stepped away from the camp to urinate and was now standing, staring at the cave with wide eyes. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Ramirez asked, visibly irritated. "I saw something," Perez responded, his voice trembling. "Something inside the cave. It was like a shadow, but it had eyes." Sergeant Ramirez scoffed. "Just your imagination. Get back to camp." But something in Perez's expression made me doubt. We decided to take turns keeping watch. The next morning we entered the cave. The light from our flashlights barely penetrated the thick darkness, and every step echoed with a mocking tone. The cave was deeper than we had anticipated, its interior a labyrinth of tunnels. After a few hours of exploration, we found a large chamber. In the center was a stone altar covered in strange symbols. The air was heavy and smelled of decay. That's when the real horror began. Ramirez started behaving strangely. At first I thought he was joking, but his eyes had a vacant look and his voice sounded distant when he spoke. "We must stay here," he said. "It has chosen us." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "We need to get out of here." But Ramirez didn't respond. Instead, he kept staring at the altar, murmuring to himself. Morales tried to snap him out of his trance, but it was useless. Suddenly, Ramirez turned and attacked Morales with superhuman strength. We had to subdue him together, but we couldn't hold him down. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and a guttural scream came from his throat. "Morales, help!" I shouted as we struggled. "I can't!" Morales was paralyzed, frozen with terror. We finally managed to immobilize Ramirez, but we knew we couldn't keep him that way for long. Then Perez approached the altar, drawn as if hypnotized. "Perez, get away from there," I warned, but it was as if he couldn't hear me. Suddenly the cave filled with a blinding light. An icy wind surrounded us, and we felt a malevolent presence. Perez began to scream, his body convulsing violently. Something emerged from the altar and took hold of him. In seconds, Perez was no longer human. His skin turned gray and his eyes filled with a void of darkness. He looked at us, and in his gaze, there was no trace of the person we had known. "Run!" shouted Santos, and we ran out of the cave as fast as our legs could carry us. But the horror didn't end there. The entity that had possessed Perez came out of the cave with us. It moved with inhuman speed, hunting us down one by one. First it was Santos, his scream echoing in the jungle as the creature caught him. Then Morales, who tried to hide but failed. Finally, only Ramirez and I were left. The sergeant had regained some lucidity but was injured and knew he wouldn't make it far. He looked at me with a mix of desperation and determination. "Take this," he said, handing me his ID and a letter for his family. "Make sure they know what happened here." "You can't stay," I replied, but he shook his head. "It's the only way. I have to delay it so you have a chance to survive." With tears in my eyes, I left him behind and ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs couldn't carry me anymore. Finally, I found a path back to the base camp. I was found the next day by a search team. No one believed my story at first. They said I had suffered a nervous breakdown and that the others had died in an accident. But I know what I saw. I know what attacked us. Since then, I haven't returned to the jungle. I live with the scars of that mission and the knowledge that something dark and evil still resides in the eye of the demon, waiting for its next victim. Many years have passed since that mission, but the memories are still fresh in my mind as if it were yesterday. We were a group of experienced soldiers assigned to missions others couldn't handle. But what we found that time surpassed any imaginable nightmare. It was the summer of 2001. The night was cold and silent when we were deployed in a remote, mountainous region of Eastern Europe. Our objective was to investigate an old underground bunker that intelligence said had been used by a secret organization during the Cold War. It was said to store biological weapons, but no one was really sure. "Have you ever felt that something isn't right?" asked Martinez, adjusting his backpack as we entered the thick forest. "Always, buddy, but today more than ever," I replied, trying to keep the spirits high. When we reached the bunker entrance, an enormous rusted steel door greeted us with a sepulchral silence. Our footsteps echoed in the tunnel, and every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. "This place gives me the creeps," murmured Johnson, our demolitions expert, as he set the charges to open the door. "Stay focused," ordered Sergeant Green, his voice as firm as a rock. "We go in, secure the perimeter, and find anything of value. No heroics." The explosion was deafening, and the echo spread through what seemed like an endless labyrinth. We entered in formation, sweeping the dark, dusty corridors with our flashlights. It seemed no one had been there for decades. "I don't like this one bit," said Perez, our medic, frowning. "There's something in the air, a strange feeling." We kept moving, finding empty rooms and rusty equipment. But then something changed. We arrived at a large room with a steel door on the other side. Opening it, the air became denser, almost suffocating. In the center of the room was a hole, a sort of pit descending into darkness. "We have to go down," ordered the sergeant, though his voice now had a tinge of doubt. One by one, we descended the creaky metal ladder. At the bottom, the atmosphere was even more oppressive. The tunnel ahead was narrower, and the walls were covered in strange symbols like ancient carvings we didn't recognize. "What the hell is this?" asked Johnson, touching one of the symbols with his flashlight. "I don't know, but I don't like it one bit," replied the sergeant, moving cautiously. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern, dimly lit by an unidentifiable source. It was there we saw it for the first time, a shadow moving quickly among the rocks. "Did you see that?" asked Martinez, his eyes wide open. "Everyone alert! Something's moving there," shouted the sergeant, aiming his weapon into the darkness. The first attack was swift. A creature, an amalgam of shadows and flesh, lunged at Johnson, bringing him to the ground. The gunfire echoed in the cavern, but our bullets seemed ineffective. Finally, the sergeant managed to bring it down, but Johnson was already gravely injured. "I need help here," shouted Perez, trying to stop the bleeding. As we tried to regroup, more of those creatures appeared. It was a desperate fight. Our flashlights were failing and ammunition was running low. Every time one of those things fell, two more took its place. Finally, we found an exit, a hidden door at the back of the cavern leading to an even deeper tunnel system. But we weren't safe. The traps were constant, hidden pits, blades in the walls, and poisonous gas in certain areas. Every step was a struggle for survival. "We have to keep going. We can't go back," said the sergeant, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and despair. Hours, maybe days, passed. We had no sense of time. We lost more comrades to the traps and the creatures. Finally, we reached a room that seemed to be the center of it all. In the center was a pedestal with an old, dusty book. "This must be it," I murmured, approaching cautiously. The book contained pages written in a language we didn't recognize, but the images were clear: dark rituals, human sacrifices, and an invocation to beings from another dimension. It was evident that someone long ago had tried to open a door that should never have been opened. "Let's destroy it," said Perez, with a determination in his eyes I had never seen before. We placed explosives around the pedestal and prepared to retreat. But before we could escape, one last creature lunged at us, larger and fiercer than the previous ones. It was a desperate fight. "Run!" shouted the sergeant as he and Johnson tried to hold off the creature. I ran, hearing the screams and gunfire behind me. Reaching a safe distance, the explosion shook the tunnel, collapsing everything around me. When the dust settled, I was alone, the exit blocked. I found another tunnel, and after hours of walking, I reached the surface. The morning sun blinded me, and I fell to my knees, grateful to be alive. But I knew I would never be the same. There were things in that bunker no one should know, dark secrets that should never be revealed. To this day, the memories haunt me. I see shadows in every corner, hear whispers in the darkness, and I know deep in my soul that those left behind do not rest in peace.